I have watched many Iceberg videos in my day, but one medium that was sorely missing from this subgenre was theater. And today I am attempting to rectify this by going through a list of obscure musicals and plays that I have compiled, and I do have to admit that this list is a bit biased based on the shows that I have seen or heard of because I could not find a reputable musical theater iceberg out there. And I'm not going to go into like a full explanation in terms of like what an iceberg video is, but just for those who are not in the know, for at least the barometer of me, the most well-known musicals are at the top and the more obscure things are at the bottom. And if there are any that you think that I missed, or you think my level of obscurity is a bit skewed, please feel free to comment in the comments below. This could be part one of a part two, potentially, but this took forever, so part two won't come for a little bit. And I have attempted to be as reputable and academic as possible, but given the fact that a lot of these shows are like decades and decades old before like modern media preservation techniques have been able to be put in place, just know that a lot of them don't have video footage, a lot of them have audio, and some of them barely have a playbill. So the number of resources that I was able to access was surprising, but also pretty low, all things considered. Admittedly, this is also kind of like a dumping ground for a bunch of shows that I've been wanting to do videos on for a really, really long time, but like there wasn't enough of a story to make like a 20-ish minute video, so they're getting the iceberg treatment. Perhaps though, after looking into them, some of them do deserve a larger dissection on their own. Well, that's enough stalling. This is going to be a long one. Let's get started. Based on the Grimm fairy tale, The Robber Bridegroom is widely performed regionally in the United States. The licensable version is the revamped 1976 Broadway revival, but this item refers to the 1975 original Broadway run. Producer Stuart Ostro invented the process of the musical workshop through his Music Theater Lab program, where Robber was given its first life. Cast members included Raul Julia, Patti LuPone, and Ernie Sabella. This version featured one song not included in the subsequent revival, titled The Real Mike Fink, for a plotline eventually cut about a contest between Jamie Lockhart and tall tale figure Mike Fink. Patti LuPone was nominated for her first Tony Award for this production, and the 90-minute simplified score and script were revamped after a successful national tour and remounted on Broadway the following year, gaining its star, Barry Bostwick, a Tony Award for Best Actor in a Musical. The playbill for this production exists, as well as a few clips from a soundboard recording. These include Patti's version of Nothin' Up and Sleepy Man. Also available are portions of the script.
Oh, Dad, thank you! Where's my herb? I had a whole apron full coming home through the woods when there's a painter come at me from behind the holly bush. Yes, he was blue. A rich midnight blue. And he must have been 11 feet long.
Green Willow premiered in the 1960 Broadway season and starred Anthony Perkins, of all people, only a few months before Perkins' most recognizable role in Psycho would debut, altering his career trajectory. Stephen Rebello writes in his book, Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, that because Perkins' presence wasn't necessary during the filming of Psycho's famous shower scene, director Alfred Hitchcock granted Perkins permission to attend rehearsals for Green Willow. Based on the novel by B.J. Shute, it follows the residents of the town of Green Willow, wherein the men are called upon to wander when they reach a certain age and leave the women they love behind. Gideon, played by Perkins, is keen to buck this tradition to stay with his girlfriend, Dory. The song, Never Will I Marry, has become a cabaret standard.
From Green Willow, Anthony Perkins.
Never, never will I marry. Never, never
somebody named Arthur Bittnell wrote Moose Murders. I tell you that because if you had a name that sounds like that, after tonight you may want to change it.
Perhaps the most infamous example in this lair, Moose Murders premiered in 1983 and, following 13 previews, had its opening and closing performance on February 22nd. Following the Holloway family as they vacation to the Adirondack Mountains, they decide to play a murder mystery game to pass the time. The play infamously flopped and has become synonymous for any resounding Broadway failure following it. Reviews at the time were fierce and giddy, with critic Frank Rich proclaiming, "Even Act 1 of Moose Murders is inadequate preparation for the ludicrous depths of Act 2. I won't soon forget the spectacle of watching the mummified Sidney rise from his wheelchair to kick an intruder, unaccountably dressed in a moose costume, in the groin." Despite its reputation, regional theaters continued to produce it in a sort of midnight movie-style appreciation. "1960's Bye Bye Birdie" was a resounding success, netting 4 Tony Award wins and a feature film adaptation and a 2009 Broadway revival. When any property gains a modicum of success, what else is there to do than...
Come on, everybody, strike up the band. We're doing a sequel.
1981's Bring Back Birdie gets part of the gang back together to stage a comeback for the AWOL Conrad Birdie by contriving an appearance at current year's Grammy show. Despite only 4 performances, after 31 previews, yikes, the show has a cast recording boasting an eclectic sound of punk, gospel, and suspiciously familiar tunes to its predecessor. In the book Not Since Carrie, 40 Years of Broadway Musical Flops by Ken Mendelbaum, he writes, "The show may rank as one of the worst Broadway musicals ever written by top-level professionals." Chita Rivera's return as Rosie was praised and got her a Tony nomination. Legendary composer of children's music, Joe Raposo, penned the songs for this ill-fated Broadway adaptation of the animated film Raggedy Ann: A Musical Adventure. In its exhibitions before Broadway, the show fared pretty well and was positively received, with Ivy Austin as Raggedy Ann receiving particular praise.
I'm just a rag doll, like
Upon transferring to Broadway, critics tore it apart, commenting on the darkness of the situations and the joyless characters. A young girl, Marcella, is dying, but her doctors don't know why. Raggedy Ann and friends decide to help her get better by adventuring to the doll doctor, but not before sparring with the villainous General D and talking a witch off a ledge, quite literally. Agreements for a cast recording faltered, and recordings of the show were lost to time until the Raggedy Ann revival effort, abbreviated as RARE, began archiving anything and everything to do with the show, even producing a live stage reading of the book and score in 2025. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Arguably the least popular of Sondheim's canon, Anyone Can Whistle originally starred Angela Lansbury and Lee Remick and closed after only 12 previews and 9 performances. The story involves a town suffering from a financial crisis and therefore fakes a miracle in order to drive tourism. Reviews were lukewarm to hostile, often remarking on the quality of the book as poor and the score as not a bore. Jesus, it's not all written like this, I swear. The consistently praised aspect of the show was the choreography by Herbert Ross, who was Tony nominated for his work. Before becoming a cult hit, Sondheim was embarrassed by the reviews and his association with the project, which he called humiliating.
Our heroine is the head nurse. No, not that nurse. She drinks.
Despite this, the cast album sold well and led to warm critical reevaluation in the 90s and 2000s, with professional productions being staged as recently as 2022.
Ever been mugged by a musical? Well, here's your chance to be mugged Assaulted, blinded, deafened, shouted down, and damn near everything but entertained.
Oh my god. What's more enticing than luring something great out of retirement only to watch it crash and burn? That's what happens when the IRS recruits good old Mona Stangley to run a Las Vegas whorehouse called Stallion Fields. However, the plan goes sour when a billionaire arranges to sell Stallion Fields to a right-wing politician. Jeremy Gerard wrote of the show, "The last new show of the Broadway season is also the worst. In fact, it isn't stretching things to say that The Best Little Whorehouse Goes Public is the crummiest junk to litter the district since Ain't Broadway Grand a couple seasons back, and that is some competition." Not much could even be said for lead Dee Hody's performance as Mona, one that garnered her a Tony nomination. There is a soundtrack recording available for free online. There are not one, but two sequels to Annie. The first, Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge, never made it to Broadway, but did have a decently staged professional production in 1989, with a small supporting role played by J.K. Simmons, of all people.
I need photos! Photos of
Annie.
This is a poetry journal.
Okay, then poems about
Annie. According to the website Performer Stuff's sub-series Island of Misfit Plays, the plot is as follows. Hold on to your butts. Daddy Warbucks discovers that he has to be married to officially adopt Annie, apparently, so he decides to throw a nationwide contest to find his new wife, with Annie and the United Mothers of America head, Mrs. Christmas, helping him decide. Meanwhile, Miss Hannigan escapes from prison and, hearing about this contest, disguises herself as Charlotte O'Hara. She finds a girl that looks identical to Annie and successfully sneaks into the contest. She kidnaps the real Annie and replaces her with Doppelganger. If you're still confused, maybe this song can help you out.
What's Miss Hannigan gonna do to me?
I don't exactly know.
Or not. Needless to say, the show was extensively reworked during previews and could not be fixed to the quality of a Kennedy Center to Broadway transfer, and was abandoned. Remarkably, a full slime tutorial of the show exists, linked here, with this comment. I knew two guys on the New York management team of this show. They used to tell me how during one of those DC performances, at the back of the theater, one turned to the other and said, "I've always wanted to be out of town with a show in trouble." That was not the last crack at an Annie sequel, because in 1993, Annie Warbucks opened off-Broadway. Using the frayed DNA of Annie 2, Annie Warbucks utilizes the Daddy Warbucks must marry premise, but smooths it out into a more believable search for love. The original cast included Harvey Presnell as Daddy Warbucks and Donna McKechnie. Following out-of-town tryouts, the off-Broadway production was intended to go to Broadway, and even secured a $2.5 million investment. But after learning the production would not be eligible for Tonys that season, the plans were abandoned. Annie Warbucks, unlike Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge, it has a cast recording and is licensable through Musical Theater International. Wow, I am really poking at Charles Strauss in this. Anyway, Rags is the story of immigration, unionization, and community. With virtually no pre-sale marketing campaign, the show didn't make a splash at the box office and closed after only 4 performances, but it did receive 5 Tony nominations, including Best Musical, with a performance recorded for posterity.
Bella! Open your eyes, Bella. Just take a breath.
Please don't tell me that again.
The show, like many Stephen Schwartz projects, was not done there, however. Remounted and revised versions played fast and loose with double and triple casting characters to cut down on the truly unruly 30-person cast, rearranged songs, and changed the point of view character. The 1999 revival, done by the Paper Mill Playhouse in New Jersey, was received well. With revisions going on as recently as 2017, an article written by Joseph Harrison commented that they have taken a show that many had written off as simply one of those shows that just didn't work, and they pulled it apart and put it back together as a fresh, vibrant, timely, and important story. I fully expect that this will become the definitive telling of this story, and it should. From what I can tell, this is the version that is available for licensing through MTI. I swear this is the last Charles Strauss entry in this lair. Superhero musicals are a rarity, and perhaps there's a reason. The technical aspects required to pull them off and the tone needed to take the story seriously are tough to toe the line on, but It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, generally shortened to Superman, tend to encapsulate these well. Dr. Abner Sedgwick, a 10-time Pulitzer Prize loser, is attempting to destroy the world's symbol of good. And meanwhile, Clark Kent spars with Max Menken, a co-worker at the Daily Planet, for Lois Lane's affection. The musical was well received, but never really caught on with audiences. It played 129 performances, and one of the songs, You've Got Possibilities, has become a cabaret standard.
Haircut, simply terrible. Necktie, the worst. Bearing, just unbearable. What to tackle first still? You've got possibilities, though you're horribly square.
Many revivals and restagings have stemmed from the original production, including a 1975 ABC TV special that I've been using clips from for visuals.
Oh, how I wish I weren't in love with Superman.
And listen to how funky this thing sounds.
In the world of evil and doubt, we need him, we need him. In these times of misery and crimes, we need him, we need him.
Good. It's camp, it's goofy, and this is the version of Superman many people had in mind before the Richard Donner film adaptation came to be. A final tidbit, the last part of the overture, heard here, was used as the opening and closing theme for all newscasts on WTOP TV and WDVM TV, Channel 9 in Washington, D.C. from 1970 to 1982. The Season is a book by William Goldman, a massive chronicle of the 1967-68 Broadway season. Used as a resource for most shows from this period, including a few later to come in this video, Goldman really did his research by seeing nearly everything presented on Broadway at the time. Goldman was known as the screenwriter for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which became a Paul Newman and Robert Redford vehicle that made a ton of money, and a sale which mounted him a small fortune. Eager to write something non-fiction, he pivoted from a piece about mental institutions to an article, later a book, on Broadway. In the New York Times, Christopher Lehman Haupt called it very nearly perfect. It is a loose-limbed, gossipy, insider, savvy, nuts and bolts report on the annual search for the winning numbers that is now big-time American commercial theater. It received mixed but generally positive reviews, with many critics who were, critiqued in the book, going on the defensive. One such critic, Clive Barnes, wrote, "I haven't read the book, but I've been told that in some ways it's rather good, but that guy's a Philistine. He doesn't like Pinter, and he doesn't like hair. If he doesn't like Pinter, I guess I'd rather he not like me either." I don't own a copy of the book, but I hope to in the near future. Biblical musical adaptations, while not an overwhelming majority, aren't as rare as you'd think. Before Children of Eden became an evolutionary curiosity for regional theaters, 2x2 cornered the Noah's Ark market for Broadway audiences. The score is decently catchy, and the lead performance from Danny Kaye is fun, although it was reported widely by composer Richard Rodgers that Kaye took liberties with the script. One such incident, where he improvised a dance to impress Dick Cavett, resulted in Kaye tearing a tendon in his leg and having to perform on crutches and a wheelchair for an extended period of the run.
The doctor says I ain't never gonna walk again. Not even on crutches.
According to Rodgers' biography, Kaye appeared with his leg in a cast and either rode around the stage in a wheelchair, in which he sometimes would try to run down the other actors, or hobbled around the stage on a crutch, which he used to goose the girls. In addition, he began improvising his own lines and singing in the wrong tempos. He even made a curtain speech after the performances in which he said, "I'm glad you're here, but I'm glad the authors aren't." The plot synopsis also places particular emphasis on the presence of a Gitka, a rodent that appears to help convince Noah's family of their dire need to build the Ark. Like, okay. The Odyssey, like the Bible, is often mined for musical adaptation, and The Golden Apple is the earliest example on Broadway. Following Odysseus and his band of hairy, merry men on their quest to retrieve Helen of Troy, the musical also gives Helen some character of her own, showing that she maybe wasn't as helpless in her kidnapping as the original story made her out to be. Her main number, Lazy Afternoon, is now a cabaret and jazz standard.
It's a lazy afternoon, and the beetle bugs are zooming, and the tulip trees are blooming, and there's not another human in view but us two.
The musical premiered off-Broadway in 1954 and quickly transferred to Broadway, although it didn't last long at the Alvin Theater. Notoriously, the full score was not recorded at the time, with a truncated version of many songs getting pressed by Decca. And in between songs, couplets are recited by cast member Jack Whitting. Only 2 years later, with the release of the musical The Most Happy Fella, would double or triple LPs become the standard for pressing lengthy scores. Due to its massive scope, the show is hardly revived, but prolific productions produced by encores and light opera works happen occasionally. In 2015, for the first time, the full score was recorded from a production done by Dallas Lyric Stage, available on Spotify. The untapped hypothetical of Ibsen's A Doll's House. What would life be like when Nora went out the door? The door! That darn door.
The scary door.
A Doll's Life sets out to answer that question, but with staid results. Prolific director Hal Prince helmed this 1982 production, but it closed after only 18 previews and 5 performances, one of his few flops. Ibsen's play, which is a fascinating study of a woman's discovery of self, is diminished here by the sheer scope of the production, with many critics commenting on the simplicity of the subject of feminism portrayed. Vincent Canby wrote in an interview, "It was overproduced and overpopulated to the extent that the tiny resolute figure of Nora became lost in the combined mechanics of Broadway and the Industrial Revolution." A cast recording was done the same year, and the original production received 4 Tony nominations. A Doll's House would be revisited on Broadway with a 2017 play, A Doll's House Part 2. Four high school friends reunite a year after their graduation, and one wants to initiate pranks and revenge on their rivals. The show began previews in May 2008, opening for its one and only performance at Circle on the Square on Broadway. This sudden closing notice was due to low advanced ticket sales. The show is available through Broadway licensing and has enjoyed productions across the world, most notably Tokyo, London, Sydney, and Los Angeles. Glory Days is performed in 90 minutes, no intermission, and centers on forgiveness, compassion, injustice, and moving on. Take the main real estate plot of Grandma got run over by a reindeer, but subtract the Christmas, the nephew, the Santa, and you've got Skyscraper. Originally starring Broadway royalty Julie Harris, the plot follows Georgina, an antiques dealer who is being kowtowed into selling her business in order to make room for a skyscraper. It also starred Charles Nelson Riley, who was reported as doing everything but set fire to his trousers to get laughs where none were written in the libretto. Typical Riley. The antics of Riley aside, there was also skepticism on the Harris casting, with some putting doubt on her abilities as a musical comedy actress, because at the time, she was primarily known for her dramatic stage work. Despite this, she and the show were nominated for Tony Awards in a season dominated by Hello Dolly, Mame, Man of La Mancha, and Sweet Charity. No wonder this fell into obscurity. In 2024, miraculously, the show was revived off-Broadway by the Regeneration Theater and Combustion Collective in a joint effort as a sort of passion project of lead producer Barnaby Edwards. Charles Strauss stands, I continue to apologize. The highly successful Thin Man film series from the 1930s and 40s, and the continued relevance of the book series the films were based on, helped get this musical adaptation off the ground. At the time, Nick and Nora held the record for the longest preview period in Broadway history, 9 weeks, beaten only by Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark in 2011 with 15. A successful Thin Man mystery consists of Nick and Nora's unrelentingly strong bond with one another, quite unshaken, but Nick and Nora gives the eponymous pair a subplot of marital woes. Further, Arthur Lawrence hadn't realized the two roles were still so closely associated with Myrna Loy and William Powell, who played the couple in the films. This, coupled with the gossipy articles speculating the long preview period was due to insurmountable troubles, Lawrence speculated this spelled doom for the show. On the Broadway cast recording, Barry Bostwick played Nick, Joanna Gleason played Nora, with Christine Baranski, Chris Sarandon, and Deborah Monk in featured roles. The only show on this list to evoke a softcore puppet parody, I don't know, there's like many more entries to come. Let My People Come opened off-Broadway in 1974 and enjoyed a modest run. During the transfer to Broadway, which had a then record 108 previews, the show never officially opened. Earl Wilson Jr. requested a close order but was outright denied despite his protests. He was quoted with saying, "I feel that the show has become vulgar." The show boasts such songs as I'm Gay, Come in My Mouth, and The Cunnilingus Champion of Company C, which resulted in a lawsuit filed by MCA Music. Even though the song could come across as parody of the original song, the result of the suit found that the song could not be construed as a burlesque of plaintiff's work per se, and was merely commentary on the era, and therefore was not protected by fair use. The composers were found liable for copyright infringement. Ugh. The show never officially opened on Broadway, closing during previews, but it has enjoyed many long-running regional productions, particularly Washington, D.C., Chicago, and a 10-year run in Philadelphia. These two plays, normally published and performed together, but not always, are both written by Peter Shaffer, who you might know better for writing Amadeus. Black Comedy was inspired by a production of Miss Julie Shaffer had attended, where National Theatre dramaturg at the time, Kenneth Tynan, commissioned a one-act play. Hooked on the idea of a play taking place during a blackout, Shaffer wrote the play to start as normal, but during the performance, a short circuit cuts the lights. The lights in reality stay up but do not modulate, implying the characters are stumbling about in the dark. Think of that scene in Buffalo Bill's basement, and you got it. At the time, it was one of the most impressive farces put to stage, this was before Noises Off, if a little long in the tooth toward the end. In order for the play to, play on Broadway, a second one-act was written by Shaffer, The White Liars. It was written as the first act of the two-act performance and follows a fortune teller and two young men whose lives are stranger than that of her predictions. Shaffer was unhappy with the play, calling it mechanical. It was later rewritten, with the fortune teller's Greek lover completely eliminated, and this is the version frequently published with Black Comedy. Now, this is the show that really sparked this whole project. I had a whole thumbnail photoshopped and everything. Here it is, just for bragging's sake. Anyway, forever inspired by Vivien Leigh, this was her one and only Broadway musical, for which she won the Tony for Best Leading Actress in a Musical. Based on the film of the same name starring Claudette Colbert, Tovaryk follows a Russian prince and duchess who are entrusted with the Tsar's fortune. They abscond with the money and are forced to take up jobs as a maid and butler to hide their identities. When the show opened in 1963, it was prolific for being the first Broadway show to open without a waxing contract, which I learned is a contract meant for recording the show on vinyl, or so I speculate. Please correct me in the comments. I'm a dummy. Eventually, Capitol Records pressed the show, and a number was performed on The Ed Sullivan Show.
Right, get up. Are you ready?
Ready, Eddie, Monsieur Eddie.
Do you remember our routine?
I've been practicing, Monsieur Georges.
Well, here we go.
Lee, in this time of her life, suffered from mental illness and other physical setbacks, and was reported to have forgotten one of her co-stars on stage during a performance. She would depart soon after. There had been talks of transferring Tovaric to the West End for Lee to star, but these plans were ultimately abandoned. I have listened to this one quite extensively, and, of course, I have my favorites. I like A Small Cartel, Wilkes-Barre, PA, and Stuck With Each Other. A truncated cast album is available on Spotify and YouTube, and there are clips of a live soundboard recording with some of Lee's performance.
Ready? Now where are you heading?
We're back!
Yeah! Yeah!
Daphne du Maurier's seminal Gothic novel Rebecca was best known as the Best Picture Alfred Hitchcock film in the 1940s, but found new life when a German-language production was helmed in Vienna to sold-out houses totaling 3 years. Of course, the foreign success of the musical meant a Broadway transfer was inevitable. Rebecca is the story of the second Mrs. De Winter, chillingly never given an identity of her own, as she lives in the shadow of the titular Rebecca, the first Mrs. De Winter. The charming Maxim whisks her away to his estate, Manderley, where she finds Rebecca's ghost haunting every nook and cranny of the place. Stuffed to the brim with spectacle, the stage production featured heavy pyrotechnics as part of the finale, as well as the staircase. The staircase, meant to be as iconic as Phantom's chandelier. The Broadway production was announced and postponed several times before seemingly going forward in 2012. However, it was caught up in a scandal when it was discovered the so-called investors of the show did not actually exist, and someone ran away with the money. There's a great video chronicling the whole endeavor by Waiting in the Wings that I'll link in the description. It's a shame too, because the cast would have included Sierra Boggess and Carolee Carmello, who are always great. The seminal English version was staged in London in 2023 at the Charing Cross Theatre. Clive Barnes, critic of the era, was quoted as saying, "There's not much wrong that a new book, new music, new lyrics, new settings, new direction, new choreography, and a partially new cast would not possibly put right." The savagery. And by all accounts, Barnes hits it on the head. The Fig Leaves Are Falling was supposedly inspired by lyricist Alan Sherman's divorce following protagonist Harry, whose feelings for a younger woman spark guilt, exhilaration, passion, and temptation. The show was obviously not reviewed well, but the performance of leading lady Dorothy Loudon received praise, resulting in a Tony nomination, despite the show only running for 4 regular performances. Other notable cast members include Barry Nelson and David Cassidy of Partridge Family fame. Remarkably, the demo tracks are on Spotify, or are available to buy on CD in conjunction with another entry later in the Iceberg. Naturally, many actors will reprise roles in their lifetime. They can originate the role on stage and preserve it for all in the film version, or vice versa. However, a 30-year hiatus between reprisals could hardly contrive itself into a success, which is where Bette Davis found herself in 1974, reprising the role of Miss Moffat in a musical version of The Corn is Green, a film she made in 1945. Due to the tepid reviews of the out-of-town tryouts, Bette Davis left the production, citing a back injury that had announced itself a second round after debilitating her the year before. In a time when Davis was finding work more and more sparse, one can only imagine the lukewarm reception caused her to get cold feet. The first, and I think only, preview can be listened to here, courtesy of the channel Goldstone Egg Roll. Another dame, another obscurity. This time, Miss Katharine Hepburn gets the musical treatment, her first and only. Set between the autumns of 1953 and 1954, this story follows fashion designer Coco Chanel as she faces derision for a new fashion line, faces bankruptcy, and gets involved in the love life of one of her models. The show featured an actual fashion show, much in the vein of 1939's The Women, showcasing actual Chanel designs going back decades. Hepburn's initial cold feet signing on were warmed when she met the actual Chanel and other troubles surfaced. The set was the bane of the ensemble's existence, as it was tough to navigate and cumbersome, often malfunctioning. According to the Wikipedia page, yeah, I know, the show featured flashbacks utilizing pre-filmed footage and projections, perhaps a first for Broadway. These film clips have been lost to time, it seems, and the show was not reviewed well, but high ticket sales to see Hepburn kept it afloat and resulted in 7 Tony nominations and a gargantuan performance at the 1970 ceremony. Thank God we have proof of this performance, because Hepburn doesn't sound bad, just a bit shaky.
Wondering why in hell she stayed. Always, mademoiselle.
The writing of the scene presented is also admirable, and perhaps with some tweaks could be due a revival? While Let My People Come may have had the most previews out of all shows on the list, that show never officially opened. Before Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark ate its lunch, a teaspoon every 4 hours held the record for the most previews before its opening night, 97. Following Nat Weiss, originally played by playwright Jackie Mason, the Jewish widower learns his son is in love with a black woman, and Weiss finds himself falling in love with that woman's mother. The play's title is never explained within the play, at least according to Clive Barnes in his New York Times review. During its preview period, Mason explained, "After every performance, I came out and asked for opinions from the audience. They loved that. It made them feel like philosophers." Critics and audiences couldn't decipher whether the play was more offensive to Jews or African Americans, but it was clear the play was not doing anyone any favors. The show had one performance before closing the same night, and it has never been revived. See the Jaguar had a short run on Broadway, lasting only 5 performances in the winter of 1952. Dramatist's website describes the plot as follows. It's a long one. In a remote section of the West, Brad owns the sole gas station and store. He owns a small zoo where he cages the occasional wildcat or whatever wildlife can be caught in the area. The cages are Brad's obsession. They remind him of man's supremacy over nature. They remind him he is a master in his village where everybody is in debt to him. But he is not master over his daughter, Jana, who has fallen in love with Brad's outspoken enemy, Dave Ricks. But if Brad's weapons are force, hatred, and violence, Dave's are peace, love, and gentleness. The two men battle over Wally Wilkins, an innocent boy of 17 who was hidden away by his demented mother and who is now free since his mother died. Because the boy is supposedly in possession of a large sum of money, Brad pursues Wally, whom Dave and Jana are escorting to safety. When Brad catches up with them, he realizes that his pursuit of Wally has alienated him from his daughter. Okay, a bit convoluted to be sure, but the play is most notable for being James Dean's first starring role on Broadway, which he would follow up with The Immoralist right before his career took off in the movies.
This is a contract of his for his first and only Broadway play. It was called See the Jaguar.
The play is available to license through Dramatists. Cult films turned Broadway musicals are common now, especially with the recent success of Death Becomes Her. In 2012, a crack at a fellow 1992 film turned stage show resulted in Leap of Faith. Raul Esparza starred as Jonas Nightingale, a con artist posing as a reverend to swindle the people of a small Kansas town out of their money. It sounds like a dozen or so movies you've probably seen before, and critics thought so too. Ben Brantley wrote, This season's black hole of musical comedy, sucking the energy out of anyone who gets near it. Ouch. After 24 previews and 20 performances, the production announced its closing, and the Times reported the show's entire $14 million investment was lost. This isn't a show, but more of a musical oddity. Many shows result in a contract to have a record label produce a cast album. I've mentioned a few of these obscurities having cast albums because they are, at least, saved for posterity, but for many coming in the Iceberg, only sound booth recordings exist, if they were saved at all. Blue Pear Records stands in the middle, not being an actual record label who steps up to Broadway flops and asks to record them. Rather, they take the sound booth recordings and press them onto vinyl records, or at least they used to. Or maybe they don't exist at all. I came across the name Blue Pear when I was doing research for another item on this iceberg, and supposedly Blue Pear had made a record of that show. Their catalog is not extensive, and it features mainly bootlegged recordings of Broadway and off-Broadway shows from the 1960s, including The Crystal Heart, The Body Beautiful, Zenda, and A Joyful Noise. Looking at the list, many are of the original Broadway casts, but a full are also from out-of-town tryouts, such as Boston and San Francisco. Peep the Star Trek Season 3 bloopers listing as well. In case you were questioning the validity of this label, as I was, real eBay listings exist of these records, complete with the company's logo. Evidence piles up when you look for it, but many questions still remain about the Longwood, Florida-based record label. How did they source their audio? Where did they sell their records? And is anyone still alive who worked for the company? Originally produced in New York's Playwrights Horizon in 2008, Saved is based on the 2004 teen comedy of the same name. Mary and her friend Hilary Faye are seniors at a Christian school, and just before senior year starts, Mary learns her boyfriend Dean might be gay.
Does she know what it's like to be bad from the inside out? How could she know what it's like? I bet she's never had a doubt.
Hey, shirts and skates!
Jesus, help me find my faith.
She's compelled to help him through a religious vision, but this leads to a massive crisis of faith. Celia Keenan Bolger was the original Mary, and Aaron Tveit was the original Dean. Despite never getting a Broadway transfer, the show was received warmly and even mounted a production in Kansas City at the Kansas City Rep Theater. Gary Griffin, who helmed that production, had sympathy for the original production, stating, "Saved is like many other successful musicals that do not reach their full potential in their first production. I believe we were only able to get a good first draft in New York, and it would be a shame to stop when we were just discovering the musical's strengths."
One of the things we thought was most important was that we were able to go and work on the material with a different kind of diverse audience. That, as Eric said, we felt, while we learned a lot from our audience in New York, and it was a very important audience to be doing the show for, it was also clear that the show has the interaction that needed to be happening in the audience. And I think that's one of the things I find most exciting, is that you're aware in the audience that the audience is made up. How is that person feeling as opposed to how I'm feeling? And this piece inspires that kind of audience charge.
Updates on the show since then have been minimal. To provide an overview for an extremely complicated financial scandal, Enron was an energy, commodities, and service company that committed large amounts of accounting fraud, leading to its collapse. In order to commit this fraud, they utilized special purpose entities and other tactics to hide billions of dollars of debt and to inflate their earnings, artificially creating the appearance of success. Sometime after the Supreme Court hearing, playwright Lucy Preble wrote a dramatized version of the events, and the play, titled Enron, premiered at the Chichester Festival in 2009. When it transferred to Broadway in 2010, it was met with mixed to negative reviews. Despite the star power of Norbert Leo Butz and Marin Mazzie, the play only lasted 1 month, and its distinct lack of Tony nominations in key lead categories helped spell its doom, at least according to Michael Billington for The Guardian. He writes, It is notable that when writers such as Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, and Edward Albee grew more experimental with age, they were quickly kicked into touch. What hope had Enron with its demon-eyed raptors, Jedi Knights, and Siamese twins? Yes, those visuals are real. And this article is very interesting in how Billington explores the differences of how musicals and plays live and die on Broadway. He posits Enron's commitment to expressionistic visuals and its lack of realism.
Oliver Haley had some bad luck. Nominated for Emmys for his work on television, his stage writing success never quite captured the same acclaim. Penning over 20 plays, 3 were produced on Broadway, and none lasted longer than their respective opening nights. The First One Asleep, Whistle, opened and closed on February 26, 1966. His second was Father's Day, opening and closing on March 16, 1971. The final was I Won't Dance, opening and closing on May 10, 1981. Despite the short runs, Father's Day earned 2 Tony nominations, Best Leading Actress in a Play and Best Scenic Design at the 25th annual ceremony. A self-described black comedy writer, he once told Bert A. Folkart for the Los Angeles Times, "My plays are primarily the attempt to make a serious theme and deal with it comedically. I try not to start writing until I've found a comic point of view for the material." To be sure, he wrote about divorce, alienation, loneliness, disability, sexuality, the list goes on. His plays are more successful regionally, and he continued to write and remount his Broadway efforts well into his later life. He passed away in 1993 at the age of 60. Setting Shakespeare to music isn't new, and of course, many have tried and done so successfully. And one of these lesser-known attempts is 1976's Rockabye Hamlet, which began life as a show called Kronberg 1582, produced as a radio episode for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It was later put on its feet in 1974 at the Charlottetown Festival in Prince Edward Island, and tread the Broadway boards in 1976. The original cast featured Larry Marshall, Kim Milford, and Meatloaf. As the name implies, the show is a rock musical and was originally staged as a rock concert, looking a lot like A Chorus Line meets Les Mis. After 7 regular performances, the show closed but continued revisions well into the mid-2000s. Revivals have continued well into the 2020s as well. A cast album from the Broadway cast was a severely truncated version of the score, boasting only 10 songs. This is so far the only recording of the show, though subsequent revivals continue to shuffle the order of songs, drop and add pieces from various concept albums, and newer songs by Cliff Jones.
I have tried all my life.
The spiritual successor to McDermott and Ragney's Hair, Dude follows a more country-inspired score. The titular Dude is Dude, a dude with an everyman tude, who has an arc about losing his innocence and attempting to regain it. Pretty paint by numbers. The interesting parts of the show come from the production, where it is highlighted and chronicled in this succinct New York Times article, which is a great gossipy read. Among the problems were the complete renovation of the Broadway theater into a presentation in the round, or an arena-like staging, to better emulate a circus that was eventually filled with fake dirt after real dirt had been used and caused trouble when it was both wet and dry. Imagine that. And because of this staging in the round, the orchestra was situated on either side of the stage, separated on one half with brass and woodwinds and the other with strings. Audiences were seated in 5 different tiers, noted in this ad as foothills, valleys, trees, mountains, and tree tops. By the way, this website called Dude Photo Index was very helpful in this particular entry. Lyricist Jerome Ragney insisted at one point that 100 butterflies be released at the beginning of each performance. Kevin Geer, the first actor cast as Dude, was unable to sing to an acceptable degree and was replaced. The book was not finished as the cast entered rehearsals. Preview performances were reported to be disastrous. According to the same article, the audience couldn't hear the orchestra, and the renovation to accommodate the staging threw off the acoustics.
Of this life are short and evil, full of sorrows and misery.
and due to the impending bad press, the director and choreographer quit and were replaced. The show went back into rehearsals, and by the second to last preview, the script was finally settled, only after an almost total rewrite of the second act. I couldn't continue to go on, but for the sake of pacing, the show ran for 16 performances, but this would not be the only flop for composer Galt McDermott this year. The 60s and 70s make up a majority of this iceberg for a reason, and one of the best examples of these strange dual decades is Via Galactica, a sci-fi musical with a hilarious Hirschfeld portrait. In fear of the incomprehensible nature of the plot, producers made an executive decision to include a plot synopsis in the playbill, and thank God, it survives for posterity.
The story takes place 1,000 years from now. Man has explored the entire solar system and decided there's no place like home. Home is Earth, and on Earth, everything's perfect. Everyone wears a permanently attached spinning hat to control their emotions. Conformity is the rule. Everyone always says we, never I. Man's also worked out his problems regarding birth, population, bigotry, and war. Our hero is Gabriel Finn, a conditioned Earthman. On a forgotten asteroid called Ithaca, a small group of people exist who reject Earth's conformity. They're led by Dr. Isaacs, an elderly scientist with a beautiful wife, Omaha. We play a triangle love story between Isaacs, Omaha, and Gabriel, but a very special kind of triangle. Dr. Isaacs, to escape Earth's control forever, plans to take the people of Ithaca on the longest space trip of all time. A trip to the stars. If man reaches the star, he can start life all over again. Our story covers the preparations for this trip and Earth's efforts to stop it. Via Galactica, man's road to the stars.
Oh my god. Among the cast were Raul Julia, Virginia Vestoff, and Keen Curtis, who was previously seen on the channel in the Amanda's video where I mistakenly called him Curtis Keen, don't come at me. Anyway, audiences were baffled despite the plot aid, not helped by the pyrotechnics and trampolines. It became one of the first shows to lose more than $1 million and became Galt McDermott's second flop that season, only 5 weeks after Dude. The court-martial of William Laws Calley Jr. in 1970 concerned atrocities committed during the Vietnam War, specifically the My Lai massacre. In 1968, Calley led 100 soldiers into My Lai and murdered hundreds of civilians with guns, grenades, and bayonets. The U.S. Army covered up this incident, but Ron Ridenour wrote letters to the U.S. President at the time, to 30 members of Congress, and the Secretary of Defense detailing the incident he had been told about, but did not witness firsthand. Calley couldn't be tried as a war criminal, so he was charged with 6 specifications of premeditated murder. This story is the basis for 1975's The Lieutenant. The original cast featured Eddie Mecca. The show has a rock approach, and the use of music, according to some, is Brechtian in tone, which is a fancy way of saying the piece emphasizes critical thinking and social reflection. Fun! The show was well received and nominated for 4 Tonys that season, but only lasted 1 week. Many cited the unpleasant subject matter. Bizarrely, a soundtrack was recorded but never publicly released, but it appears promotional copies were released to some outlets, as vinyls have floated around in collector spaces, even popping up on eBay. Someone did, at one point, acquire the record and digitized it, and it can be listened to on YouTube. What is the Shroud of Turin? It is this: a linen cloth that supposedly bears the image of Jesus of Nazareth. It looks faint here, but when viewed on a photographic negative, a facial reconstruction can be more clearly defined. It has a very long history, first appearing in papers dating back to 1354, being displayed in France. The shroud is connected to Jesus in that it was the piece of linen used to wrap his body following his crucifixion, later recovered following his resurrection. It has undergone many tests to determine legitimacy, but considering the shroud has lasted hundreds of years, damage and stains and mishandling, fires and outside contaminants and historical repairs make this research frustratingly inconclusive. The Shroud is part of the main conflict of Into the Light, a 1986 musical starring Dean Jones as James Prescott, a physicist set out to prove the cloth's truth. The push and pulls of science versus faith are readily discussed, and according to critic Frank Rich for the New York Times, Mr. Tamburino and Mr. Forster confuse ponderousness with seriousness. James and a hip Jesuit priest, William Perry, carry out their spiritual debates with all the intellectual heat of high school students executing math equations. While the composer, Lee Holdridge, has operatic and inspirational pretensions, his score is monotonous and insistent in the style of loud wallpaper. The show closed after 6 regular performances, and there is no cast recording, but production footage was taken when the show was reviewed for Dennis Cunningham's entertainment segment for CBS.
The mind-boggling point is that a whole group of people got together to make a Broadway musical about the Shroud of Turin.
It can all be explained. It can all be explained.
Well, it's not really a musical, it's a musical debate, a musical essay, a musical lecture. A shameless piece of missionary work on West 52nd Street.
At the end of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia's 4th season in 2008, their first musical episode aired. In said episode, Charlie tells the gang he's written a musical and will be staging a production. Mac, Dennis D, and Frank want to star in the show, but slowly begin to realize Charlie has injected some disturbing childhood admissions into his script.
Tiny boy, little boy, baby boy, I need you. Tiny boy, little boy, I want to touch you, boy.
If you only knew what I'd do to you.
You gotta pay the troll toll. If you want to get into that boy's hole, you gotta pay the troll toll to get in.
The episode is a classic among fans, and some of the songs are iconic in the fandom: Dayman, Little Boy, and the Troll Song. In 2009, the actors took the show on the road. Select cities were New York, Boston, Seattle, San Francisco, and the show's namesake, Philadelphia. The show was expanded from the half-episode length of roughly 12 minutes to a healthy 45, including 2 new songs. The performance also included a preview screening of a then-upcoming Season 5 episode. The show was filmed and included as a bonus feature on the Season 4 DVD box set, but is also available on YouTube.
Your boy waits.
Boy's soul is mine.
What, I hear you say? Aren't all of Sondheim's shows performed often and cataloged well? Well, yeah, they are, Becky, but this isn't technically a stage musical. Originating on television as part of the only season of ABC's Stage 67, an anthology show ranging from drama, variety, documentaries, and original musicals, as is this entry's case. Based on a short story by John Collier, the story follows Charles Snell, a young poet taking refuge from the world in a department store where not everything is as it seems. He meets a young woman, Ella, and the two defy the established rules and run away together. Charles is played by Anthony Perkins, his second appearance on the Iceberg, and Ella is played by Charmaine Carr, only 1 year after her role as Liesl von Trapp in The Sound of Music. The episode is an interesting mix between the original Twilight Zone and Company, which I would compare it to musically.
Live in your barbarous jungle, screaming for ways to get clear. When all the screaming has died away, come and visit my hideaway.
The show was originally broadcast in color, but the colorized master tape has seemingly been lost to time, so only a black and white recording exists. A pristine 16mm print was the basis for all home media releases, and the show has been produced on stage in 2005 and 2010, both in limited runs. Many large literary works escape stage adaptation, and some even escaped the musical treatment, but John Steinbeck's East of Eden was not so lucky. Grand in scope and spiritual in theme, Here's Where I Belong is the story of Cal and Aaron, sons of Adam Trask, as Cal tries to find his place in the world, step apart from his brother, and earn his father's love. The story itself is intriguing enough from a dramatic standpoint, but there was almost immediate hesitancy at the viability of the source material as a musical. The adaptation of the book fell to Terrence McNally, but he requested his name be removed when he heard revisions that were not his own. According to Not Sense Carry by Ken Mendelbaum, McNally's name was left on the program because 85% of the book was still McNally's.
Hey, what's it like? What's it like being all the way down with being with a girl? What's up? No, girls like the kind you know. Well, beats chinning.
In the story, Adam and the boys are mentored and debated by their Chinese houseboy, Lee, played by James Coco, who is, by all metrics, not a Chinese man. The show was picketed by members of the Oriental Actors of America. A notable counterpoint to this was the scenic design by Ming Cho Lee, eventual Tony Award winner. The show opened and closed on March 3rd, 1968, and was supposedly one of the rarities preserved by Blue Pair, though I cannot find evidence of a listing. There is, however, a soundboard recording floating around the internet if you know where to look.
Cal gets by with no one else but Cal. Cal does fine with no one else but Cal.
Tintypes is a musical revue consisting of scenes and songs that don't have an overarching plot. With a company of 5 performers, the ensemble performs songs that were popular during the Tin Pan Alley era, specifically between 1897 and 1914, just prior to World War I. When it opened on Broadway in 1980, it was not a smash hit, but it did run for 93 performances and gained 3 Tony nominations that season. The ensemble presents various characters throughout the production, swapping in and out with one another. The soundtrack recording does not separate each song, but features montages from the scenes. Thankfully, the show was more or less preserved with the original cast in 1982 when a professionally filmed television recording was aired. It can be viewed in its entirety here on YouTube.
Mom's little baby loves shopping, little baby loves shopping. Mama's little baby loves shortening bread.
If the lyricist and book writer's name looks familiar, it's because he wrote Rosemary's Baby. Anyway, a Gilded Age well-to-do young woman, Alicia Van Gilder, wants a career. However, given the era she's from, she's shut out from pursuing any professional development and becomes a jewel thief, or a cat burglar! Exclamation point! As you do. Second exclamation point. If you know anything from this show, you might know the gender-bent version of the song She Touched Me, recorded by Barbra Streisand, who was married to Elliot Gould, an original cast member. The show also starred Leslie Ann Warren, Charles Durning, and Beth Howland. Ira Levin originally tried to write the music himself, but was convinced to have Milton Schafer pen the score. Originally titled Cat and Mouse during development, a book was published under the same name, so the show's title needed to be changed. According to Levin, back then we all felt that a name change was mandatory. Drat! The cat, a phrase lifted from the show's opening number, was the best I could come up with. I didn't like it then, I don't like it now. Several critics didn't like it either. More advice to young playwrights, never use 2 exclamation points in a title. 1, you can get away with. 2, no. Lasting only 8 performances, the show was pressed onto vinyl long after it closed by aforementioned Blue Pair Records, though a Philadelphia tryout soundboard recording was used instead.
She touched me. She put her hand on mine right there. She touched me.
As kooky publicity stunts go, Steve Brody's jump from the Brooklyn Bridge was up there. When he survived, he ran a thriving saloon and became a performer. Doing a Brody even entered the popular lexicon at the time. Brody is the figure the musical Kelly is based on.
Hop Kelly is a daredevil and down-on-his-luck busboy who has failed to do a heroic jump from the Brooklyn Bridge. The plot follows him mustering up the courage to do it. The show's budget ballooned to $650,000, and the show opened and closed on February 6, 1965. During previews, characters played by Ella Logan and Avery Schreiber were written out, and one review commented, "Ella Logan was written out of Kelly before it reached the Broadhurst Theater Saturday night. Congratulations, Miss Logan." Eventually, the producers and playwright were threatening to sue for damages, with Charlap and Lawrence claiming that their product had been harmed through changes and omission requested by the producers. A demo recording of the show was released in lieu of a proper studio recording, with one song, Never Go There Anymore, becoming a cabaret standard. Even Stephen Sondheim claimed it was a song he wished he'd written. He cannot escape. Based on the novel Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, Charlie and Algernon is the story of Charlie Gordon, a man of below-average intelligence who undergoes experimental trials to inflate his IQ, mirroring that of a mouse who has undergone the same treatment. When he witnesses the mouse's intelligence fading as time moves on, Charlie realizes he cannot revert to what once was. Heady stuff. The show originally opened on the West End, starring the darling Michael Crawford of eventual Phantom of the Opera fame as Charlie, and became quite famous for its vaudevillian throwback of Charlie using a trained mouse to do a trick. Positive reviews guaranteed a Broadway transfer, but the score was overhauled and the show recast. The spectacle of the project perhaps flattened the actual philosophical discussion of intelligence and nature versus nurture, as critic Frank Rich noted, "Over and over, he reminds us that science is fallible, that intelligence must be tempered with human feeling, that certain children and mice are God's creatures too. That's all well and good, but noble sentiments in themselves do not constitute an evening of theater. If they are not attached to well-observed characters, they sound as hollow as the crowd-pleasing bromides of a glib candidate running for public office." The show ran for 12 regular performances and was nominated for a Best Score Tony Award. The standout numbers are Reading, Hey Look at Me, and Whatever Time There Is. Because it premiered in 1980, VHS bootlegs of the show exist, albeit just in clips, on YouTube. Hamilton was not the first musical to incorporate anachronistic-sounding music into a period story, though that was probably the most successful. One of the earliest examples is Onward, Victoria, the story of a real-life figure, Victoria Woodhull. I don't have much time to elaborate on her history, but please do so yourself. She's incredibly fascinating. What we need to know here is that she and her sister were the first women to open a brokerage firm and become millionaires, at least in America. Featuring burlesque numbers, it originally opened off-Broadway in 1979 under the name Unescorted Women and transferred to Broadway the following year. The show had 23 previews and already had its closing notice posted before opening night, culminating on its clopening on December 14, 1980. The score was released on CD and can be listened to online if you know where to look, or you could buy it. As with Charlie and Algernon, clips of the show recorded on VHS can be watched online, with many commenters praising the musical numbers. The Yearling is a coming-of-age book about Jody, the son of Penny and Ora, who are a struggling family trying to make ends meet. Jody longs for a pet deer and is able to get one and grow up with it over the course of a year. When the fawn eats their crops, Penny forces Judy to make a radical decision. Though no production issues actually occurred, at least through the research I did, the responses to The Yearling were dire and condescending. David Fick, keeper of the blog Musical Cyberspace, writes, "Some think that perhaps with a better director, the show itself would have been better. Others tell tales of how the show ran out of money and couldn't afford to run long enough to catch on with audiences. Both stories seem like reasonably valid options." I would believe this, as the show played 11 previews and 3 regular performances before closing. The affection for the show is long-running, As on the same blog, published in 2014, there are over 20 comments reminiscing about audience members' viewing of the original production, family members of the cast and crew giving anecdotes, and even as recently as 2023, cast members from non-Broadway productions giving their 2 cents. Fascinatingly, 3 things pop out at me here. 1, there's a mention of an unreleased soundtrack of the show, not commercially available, but has been listened to by a very small selection of people. This user, whose name I will not include, claims to have heard the recording from one of the rehearsal pianists. Another user claims to have the same soundtrack, though labeled a different name. 2, the same user has access to sheet music for a cut song titled Everything Beautiful, which had apparently been restored into a Missouri production of the show. 3, a third user claims to have a VHS recording of the 1985 production staged in Atlanta, Georgia, not filmed in an official capacity by their judgment, though the recording has surfaced on YouTube. The musical lives on in recordings of songs by popular artists such as Barbra Streisand, Greta Matassa, and in one fun line, a song that Sondheim wishes he'd written himself, I'm All Smiles.
I'm all smiles, darling. You'd be too.
Not affiliated with the animated Disney film, the 101 Dalmatians musical is adapted straight from the Dodie Smith novel of the same name. The musical was originally sponsored by Purina Dog Chow in a pretty obvious promotion, and used 15 live Dalmatians in its cast. The book, often taking the dog's point of view, has this perspective replicated on stage by use of actors on stilts, though I cannot find a picture of this. Rachel York starred as Cruella de Vil and got extremely positive reviews for her portrayal. The rest of the show, however, was given a lukewarm reception as the choreography, songs, and overlong book drew criticism. After the conclusion of its US tour in 2010, the show has not been staged in a professional capacity since. Though, a different adaptation tread the boards in London in 2022, simply titled 101 Dalmatians. Some shows make their out-of-town tryouts and carve their way to success. Some tragically close out in Boston or San Francisco, and only select few know the potential of these projects. Home Again is one of those that closed out of town in Toronto and was never given substantial viability again. Originally starring Dick Shawn, the story followed 3 generations of the Baker family, all with their own contemporary struggles to juggle. Perhaps Coleman's most ambitious project to never reach Broadway, the show was plagued with book rewrites, recasting issues, and the addition and subtraction of musical numbers between performances. A soundboard recording of the show allegedly exists, and is speculated based on the snippet of one of the songs, When the Going Gets Tough, which yes, I have listened to over and over because it's really, really catchy.
The going gets tough, the tough gets going. You remember that boy, the things worth doing when you fight. Do it right, don't give in. You got to learn to take it out of skin.
Another shout out to Goldstone Egg Roll for their dedication to uploading and preserving parts of these obscurities. What a dark year for Broadway, huh? What is this, like the 4th one we've done from 1972? I cannot possibly do this one justice, so I'll just read the Clive Barnes New York Times review in almost its entirety. Muggings, massage parlors, and disasters such as Hurry Harry have all conspired to give Broadway a bad name. Hurry Harry, by the way, is a musical that last night had the courage and effrontery to open at the Ritz Theater. It is so feeble that even its opening is, I suppose, worthy of some congratulations. Lesser men would have given up in the face of the inevitable. But the producer, Peter Grad, and the 3 people who wrote the book, the man who wrote the music, and the man who wrote the lyrics, fought on in spite of everything. The story is about a poor little rich boy who wants to be happy, and its best aspect is that it ends unexpectedly soon, and its worst is that even that is far too late. The rich boy is Harrison Fairchild IV, born with a silver spanner, a monkey wrench on this side of the Atlantic, in his mouth, who tries Greece, Africa, Broadway, sex, and fortune-telling as a therapy for his own misery. Personally, could only concentrate on my own misery. Before the show had been on 10 minutes, I found myself thinking, Hurry, Harry, hurry, hurry, hurry. The book by Jeremiah Morris, Lee Kalkheim, and Susan Purkis is so flat that it would make Holland seem like the Himalayas. The music by Bill Whedon has a built-in amnesiac factor that makes it self-destruct in memory instantaneously, and the lyrics by David Finkel are possibly the worst part of the show. There is a permanent setting by Fred Volpel that is beige and modernistic, and looks as though it might have been intended as the background for a new TV quiz game for the freshly divorced, probably called The Hating Game. Oh my god. Hurry Harry played only 2 performances, closing on October 13th, 1972. What if, in John Carpenter's Halloween, instead of focusing on the psychopathic killer, we focused on the fellow inmates trying to put on a musical just out of shot? That's not exactly the premise for 1972's Halloween, but it's close enough. Set in an insane asylum, the book follows a dozen characters as they participate in Halloween festivities on their ward. This New York Times article, dated March 12, 1972, states the show will transfer to Broadway in the fall. What synergy? After a limited engagement in Florida? An unintuitive path, for sure. Starring Barbara Cook, Jose Ferrer, and Dick Shawn again, the show had a week's run at Florida State University due to a push from then head of the department, Richard G. Fallon, and others, not only from a professional process standpoint, by giving the theater students the opportunity to understand the workshopping of a new show, mostly the scholarly aspects. If only they had a more confident environment from which to learn. Fortunately, we can listen to a large chunk of the show, thanks once again to Goldstone Egg Roll, where many commenters either participated in the show or saw it during that Florida run. General consensus is that the music was serviceable while the lyrics were awful, and I can attest to that.
Kiss yesterday goodbye, Victoria. That's only something way that when, and hills that burn grow green again.
One user shares a story about Dick Shawn attempting to playfully steal his drumsticks while making an entrance from the orchestra pit. A link to the video is in the description. Arguably the most successful show on this iceberg, running for over 200 performances, Subways Are for Sleeping is a fascinating look at strategic marketing. The show follows Angie McKay, a journalist who learns about a well-dressed vagrant, Tom Bailey, who finds odd jobs for fellow drifters. To learn more, she disguises herself as a girl new to town, but the deception does not last long. After 2 previews, the show opened to negative reviews and lack of publicity. The New York Transit Authority refused to allow print advertisements for the show to run in subways in fear of the show's title technically allowing people to sleep on their trains. Further, due to the negative reception, producer David Merrick and press agent Harvey Sabinson devised a scheme where they invited citizens with identical names to famous theater critics, like Walter Carr, Howard Taubman, Richard Watts Jr., etc., to watch the show, and later printed their favorable comments in the trade papers. This print ad not only featured their words, but pictures of the critics, lending legitimacy to their statements. The ad went out in early editions of the New York Herald Tribune before being pulled, but the stunt worked, allowing the show to run for 205 performances, and eventually turned a small profit. Original cast member Phyllis Newman won a Tony Award for her work, a role which infamously had her costume as only a towel. Not to be confused with the DuckTales episode of the same name, Home Sweet Homer is another adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey and is one of the most notorious flops in Broadway history. Starring Yul Brynner, who had made it big with his success in The King and I decades prior, was eager to replicate said success with this project. However, problems began almost immediately. As soon as the show started its out-of-town tour, Brenner and co-star Joan Diner had illnesses that caused them to miss several performances. This was due, at least in their opinion, to some short ribs they had eaten at Trader Vic's in Manhattan shortly before departing on tour, resulting in a $7.5 million lawsuit. Yikes. Wherever the show was mounted, it got poor reviews, resulting in original book writer and lyricist Eric Siegel to request his name be removed from the program. Albert Marr stepped up and took over staging the entire show. In August of 1976, well into the tour, Brenner sued to terminate his contract, trying to jump off this sinking ship, but was slapped with a countersuit from the producers of $1 million. When the reviews pointed to a stinker, the producers tried to halt the show from making its Broadway debut, but Brenner threatened to quit if they didn't open. Its one and only performance at the Palace Theater was a Sunday matinee where the closing notice was posted as soon as the curtain fell. A track sung by Joan Diner has been preserved by none other than our friend Goldstone Eggroll, and she is so good. Even this deep, Strauss cannot escape. This was perhaps the hardest one to research due to the name, as generic as it is. Charles Strauss and Lee Adams had worked with Sammy Davis Jr. in 1964 on a show called Golden Boy, which had become an unabashed success. Inspired by that experience, Strauss and Adams decided to write a show about a sleazy white theater producer's attempts to adapt an African-American writer's serious play as a commercial stage musical. When the star of the show drops out, the playwright steps in to save it all. Well, that's interesting. But the execution by all accounts was really where the show fell apart. Much like the reception of Disney's Superstar Limo, a Broadway musical's reception was poor and proved to please no one due to its cynical nature and stereotypes without much examination. Surprisingly, pictures and video of the one and only performance on December 21st, 1978 are preserved thanks to scalding reviews from various critics in this compilation video.
Roland, Broadway musical, now that's a title, but wait until you hear the plot. A timid, sensitive young black man has written a serious play. A producer will give it a production only if he can turn it into a glitzy, empty-headed musical. Not that a Broadway musical is precisely a glitzy, empty-headed musical about a glitzy, empty-headed musical, but far too often it comes much too close to that. So it is partly that, partly a satire of itself, partly a plea for racial harmony, partly a satire of Broadway matters. It is, in fact, in large parts, a big in-joke with heavy emphasis on the in and very light emphasis on the joke.
Of course, Goldstone Eggroll has the most complete version of the show, which I will link below. Based on the French comedy film La Kermesse Héroïque, Carnival in Flanders is set in 1616 in the small town of Flackenburg, where a Spanish duke and his posse descend upon the community. When the mayor plays dead, the duke attempts to seduce his wife. Bing Crosby was one of the main financiers of Carnival in Flanders, as his faith in the songwriting team was high, because they had been writers behind many of his hits. Though, what should have given him pause was the team's previous theatrical effort, Nellie Bly, another critical and commercial flop. As with many of these stories, the creative team shuffled around many times, and the cuts and rewrites done were scrapped and overhauled by Preston Sturgis, eventual credited book writer, before eventually opening on Broadway. The sets and costumes were given praise, and the performance of the widow, portrayed by Dolores Gray, was singled out. In his review for the New York Times, Brooks Atkinson wrote, "In this version, prepared for the stage by Preston Sturgis, it is laborious and banal. As usual, the theater has lavished a lot of wealth and talent on this hokum. Lucinda Ballard has dressed everyone to the nines. Although Oliver Smith's scenery is cluttered and rather desperate, there is certainly a lot of it." The show introduced the standard "Here's That Rainy Day" and miraculously won Dolores Gray a Tony Award for Best Actress in a Musical, still holding the record for the shortest running performance honored by the Tonys as of this recording. Outrage. Few Broadway shows tend to elicit the amount of outrage that I have seen for Lita Had a Little Swan, and this one, it's kind of hard to describe. According to an article in The Times, the play is about a pair of former hippies who turn into outraged parents when their adolescent children start making love to animals. Outright banned by Lord Chamberlain's office in Britain, where it was set to make its premiere but had not obtained a performance license, Lita was expected to open on Broadway after its run of previews, but was cancelled after the final preview performance due to the absolute contempt audience members had for this subject matter, which, for all intents and purposes, was a high comedy that, according to playwright Gascoigne in the same article, lacked the polish and precise high comedy manner the play demands. As a drama critic, I would have given it a bad review myself. Two interesting notes before we move on. First, the title is perhaps a reference to the Greek myth of a similar premise, that of Lita being seduced by Zeus, who, disguised as a swan, impregnates her and is carrying Helen and Polydeuces at the same time she's carrying children from her husband, Tyndareus, Castor, and Clytemnestra. Second, on opening night, when the decision was made to scrap the opening, producer Claire Nectarne broke the news and they all took it very quietly. Absent was cast member Michael J. Pollard, who was attending the 1968 Academy Awards as a Best Supporting Actor nominee for 1967's Bonnie and Clyde. Therefore, he did not receive the silver Tiffany's keyring inscribed with Lita, the intended opening night gift for the cast and crew. In the case of Rachel Lily Rosenblum and Don't You Ever Forget It, whose extra A was snagged from Barbra Streisand, more is more and not better. This convoluted show follows Rachel, a young woman from a fish market who intends to make it big. So big that you'll never forget her name. She ends up as a famous gossip columnist, followed by an Academy Award nomination and a mental breakdown, all set to disco. Ellen Green, pre-Little Shop, was cast as Rachel, and the cast also included Wayne Cilento, Paul Jabara, Anita Morris, and Andre DeShields. Of course, numerous shufflings of the creatives caused chaos, and when the show started previews on November 26, 1973, everyone knew the show was beyond repair. On December 1st, a small notice was printed stating the show would close that night prior to its official opening, causing the demand for tickets to skyrocket. Everyone who could wanted to go turkey hunting that night. Frank Rich noted that the show had its small cult following, as many audience members could be heard singing the songs and giving ovations after every number. In 2017, 54 Below gave the show another landing pad by seemingly buoying the promotion with its notorious status. Clips of those songs exist online. Inspired by the financial and critical success of the Broadway adaptation of The Wizard of Oz in 1903, Oz writer L. Frank Baum set out to write a sequel, that being The Marvelous Land of Oz, which furthered the adventures of the Scarecrow, Tin Woodman, and introduction of many other characters. That book was dedicated to Fred A. Stone and David C. Montgomery, who were starring in the Broadway show, but refused to leave its very popular tour for a sequel show. As a result, the treatment of the book for the stage was extensively rewritten to eliminate the roles of the Scarecrow and Tin Woodman in order to appease Stone and Montgomery's wishes. Instead, the show focuses on the Wogglebug, a highly magnified insect of great intellect that appears halfway through The Marvelous Land of Oz. On top of these changes, several other aspects appear from various Baum novels, most notably Glinda's replacement Mayetta from The Magical Monarch of Mo, an Oz-adjacent project. The cast was massive, and names were preserved for posterity here on the Wikipedia article. The show was a laborious 3-act undertaking with 21 songs, though this number varies. The sheet music released by Hungry Tiger Press in 2002 is the complete score for the show as it existed, though it is noted that many of the song sheets have been destroyed or lost to time. The script, however, does exist, but was not elected to be published at that time. Though not as acclaimed as 1903's The Wizard of Oz, it still garnered mild praise for the performances. Oz fans have staged revivals for their conventions twice, once in 1986 and again in 2023. A filmed version of the show was uploaded to YouTube in 2025, but it is now privated. The old adage with musicals that distinguishes them from plays is that you often get so emotional, you have to sing. It goes beyond just saying words. Every ounce of expression has to be encapsulated by the flamboyant indication to belt those notes.
על מה הם מדברים אני לא יודע, את הסקופ הזה רוצים כולם.
And the Israeli launch of Windows XP seems to be one such occasion, as an industrial musical was staged to celebrate this momentous occasion. The industrial musical was in vogue in the 1950s, but had mostly died out by the 1980s. Microsoft decided this wasn't the case for such a momentous time in tech, but was ultimately deemed the most embarrassing event of not only the year, but the millennium. Given the track record of said millennium, perhaps it's waived its top spot. Microsoft, initially so proud of their efforts, removed the edited footage of the show from its website in late 2001, and although a few clips had been mirrored on YouTube, the entire show was thought to be lost media. In 2023, a full recording was found on Twitter, originating from a tweet from 2017. It can now be enjoyed in its full 98-minute glory, every single second. Few comedy groups endured the test of time, but the Marx Brothers are continually referenced as inspirations for many of our 21st century greats, and a musical about their rise would be intensely fascinating. But what about their mother, Minnie Marx? She was the driving force behind their success, after all. Though not the stage mother from hell a la Gypsy's Rose, she was a force in her own right. The first draft of the show was written in 6 weeks, though the second act proved to be a problem and would continue to be an issue well into previews. Actress Toadie Field was wanted for Minnie, but the production ultimately went with Shelley Winters, who had trouble with her lines, no wonder they were changing almost daily, but was such a star she would draw in a better box office. The show wasn't given a tryout and instead began previews in New York that lasted for 64 performances. Groucho, one of the original 4 Marxes, would be at the rehearsals reminiscing about the past, much to the creative team's annoyance. Throughout the previews, it was noted the second act needed to be rewritten, and secretly was by Joseph Stein. Despite all leads pointing to disaster, Arthur Marx noted everything clicked on opening night, and reviews were not half bad. Groucho's name was on the playbill as an advisor, thought to draw in more sales as an authorized version of events, but a scathing review by Clive Barnes is thought to be the show's death knell. A soundtrack recording was released by RCA Victor, and Goldstone Eggroll uploaded a song sung by Shelley Winters that was cut during the lengthy preview period. Ah, the 80s. A time in musical theater history where the mega musical was taking up space on the boards, sometimes to great success, other times to gaudy obscurity. Merlin is a case of the latter, where stage magic supplemented the actual substance. The show follows a young Merlin as he is still learning the rules of his magic abilities. He must overcome the evil queen's attempts to get her son Fergus on the throne as King of England. Chita Rivera starred as the Queen and Doug Henning as Merlin. It was an early show for Nathan Lane as well, and Christian Slater. The show notoriously delayed its opening 3 times during its elongated preview period, totaling to 69 shows. Nice. The spectacle of the show brought the best reviews, specifically the stage illusions and the costumes. The show, nominated for 5 Tonys, had its awards performance preserved, and amazingly, the full show shot from the back of the house on a potato exists as well.
There's fire and water, but most of all fun. A fairy tale feeling to cheer everyone.
When you see what you see, you'll have to agree with me.
It's about magic. It's about magic. It's about wonder. It's about takes your breath away and believe your eyes. Don't you love the surprise?
Perhaps the most surprisingly pleasing discovery I made on this journey, I have 2 songs on my Spotify liked songs, The Grass Harp is based on the novel by Truman Capote, in which 2 elderly women and an orphan boy temporarily retreat from life to a treehouse. All the while, a sister attempts to steal the recipe for a miracle elixir held by one of the old women. The show, as strange of a summary as that is well remembered by those who saw one of its 7 performances and listened to its cast album, which is so good. The elegant stylings of Barbara Cook, Carol Bryce, and Russ Thacker on the album have carried it from flop to loved oddity. Elaine Stritch was part of the original out-of-town tryouts, but was unavailable for the Broadway transfer. The show's sound is very of its time, given the orchestrations of the song Floozies specifically, which is a favorite of auditioners and cabaret singers.
All I ever think about is floozies, beautiful, exotic kind of floozies. Inside my brain, they sure can raise Cain. I watch them Sundays who jack hoochin' in their undies.
Although a full bootleg of the show is not available, selections from the final performances, spotlighting Barbara Cook's performance, is available on YouTube. The video features many loving comments from audience members praising the show. And interestingly, they note the sound amplification issue, which I was previously unaware of. Seems like this was before the enhancement of personal microphones. This user notes the burlap-infused scenic design ate up most of the sound. Of course, the soundtrack is available on Spotify, and a 30-minute adaptation from CBS's Camera 3 was recorded for television without the original cast. Of all the shows I've covered here, I would love to see a revival of The Grass Harp the most.